You run your labor numbers at the end of the week. The percentage looks fine. Then you look at your bottom line and wonder where the money went. That gap between labor percentage that looks manageable and the bank account that feels like it got mugged in an alley is what we need to talk about. Because your labor cost formula is probably missing one number. Hey, the Restaurant Pro. This is Dave Scott Peters, restaurant expert, coach, and creator of the Restaurant Prosperity Formula. Today, we're going to talk about the one number your labor cost formula is missing. The missing number is overtime. Not just overtime dollars, overtime hours. Because overtime is not only expensive, overtime is a warning light. When overtime shows up week after week, it is usually telling you something deeper is broken. Your schedule may be weak. Your managers may not be managing the schedule. Your team may not be cross-trained. You may be too dependent on one or two people. You may have poor hiring discipline. You may have no labor budget by shift. You may have managers who are afraid to cut staff. You may have a culture where just stay longer has become the answer to every problem. And every one of those problems has a cost. Most restaurant pros look at labor like this. Labor dollars divided by sales equals labor cost percentage. That formula matters. But it's incomplete if you're not also looking at overtime hours. Because two restaurants can have the same labor cost percentage and be in very different positions. Restaurant A has a labor cost of 30%, with almost no overtime. Restaurant B has a labor cost of 30%, but is running 50 hours of overtime every week. Those are not the same business. One has control, the other has a fire hiding inside the schedule. I was on a coaching call recently where a restaurant pro shared that she was running around 50 hours of overtime every week. The week before had been even higher. That is not a small leak. That is not a busy week. That is not the cost of doing business. That is a flashing red light in a server apron. And here's the problem. If you only look at labor percentages, you might miss it. Let's say your sales were strong that week. Your labor percentage might look acceptable because sales helped cover the cost, but overtime is still eating into profit. And worse, it's creating a habit. The team learns that poor planning gets solved by extra hours. Managers learn that they don't have to schedule tighter because someone will just stay late. Employees learn that overtime is a part of the deal. And you learn nothing until the P&L punches you in the face. Overtime is expensive because you are paying more for the same hour of work. But the real damage is not just the premium pay. The real damage is the overtime, what it reveals. It reveals weak scheduling. If your managers are building schedules from memory instead of sales forecasts and labor budgets, overtime will creep in. It reveals poor cross-training. If only one cook can work grill, guess what happens when that person is already at 38 hours and you need coverage? You pay overtime. It reveals bad accountability. If managers are not required to manage hours daily, they will discover overtime after it's already happened. That is not management. That's archaeology. It reveals poor staffing depth. If the whole restaurant depends on 3 people who always come through, congratulations, you don't have a team. You have hostages with name tags. And eventually they burn out, quit, or become impossible to manage because everyone knows you need them too badly. So how do you fix it? First, track overtime every week. Not once in a while, not when payroll feels high, every week. And don't bury it in payroll reports nobody reads. Put it in front of your managers. How many overtime hours did we run? Who had them? What department? What shift? Why did it happen? Was it caused by volume, poor scheduling, call-outs, poor prep, weak training, late cuts, or manager decision-making? You need the why. Because we had overtime is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. Second, set an overtime target. For many restaurants, that target should be 0 or as close to 0 as possible. Will emergencies happen? Yes. Will someone call out? Yes. Will the weekend kick your butt once in a while? Of course. This is the restaurant business, not a scented candle retreat. But if overtime is happening every week, it is no longer an emergency. It's your system. Third, require managers to review hours before the end of the week. This is huge. If your pay period ends on Sunday and you look at overtime on Monday, you're too late. The game is over. Managers should know midweek who is trending towards overtime. They should know who can pick up hours. They should know who needs to be cut. They should know where the schedule is at risk. Labor controls happen during the week, not after payroll closes. Fourth, cross-train aggressively. Overtime often exists because too few people can do too many important jobs. That is a training failure. If only one person can open, close, prep, work a station, or handle a key responsibility, that person will become expensive and probably cranky. Cross-training gives you options. Options reduce overtime. Options protect profit. Options keep one employee from becoming the unofficial mayor of your schedule. Fifth, schedule to budget, not a vibe. A lot of schedules are built based on habit. Monday usually needs this. Sarah always works that shift. We always have 3 people on. That's not scheduling. That's copying last week's homework and hoping the teacher doesn't notice. Your schedule should be built from expected sales, productivity targets, and labor budgets. Then managers need to adjust based on reality. If sales are soft, cut. If sales are strong, support the shift intelligently. But don't let overtime sneak up like some mysterious ghost in the walk-in. It's trackable, it's manageable, and it's usually preventable. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying overtime is always bad. Sometimes overtime is better than bad service. Sometimes overtime is better than leaving a shift exposed. Sometimes overtime is the right short-term decision. But it should be a decision, not an accident. That's the difference. Controlled overtime is management. Surprise overtime is chaos, and chaos is expensive. So here's your action step. Pull your last 4 payroll periods. Look at the total overtime hours for each week. Then break it down by person, department, and shift. Ask 3 questions. Who is getting the overtime? Why is it happening? What would have to change to prevent it next week? Not someday, next week. Because if overtime is showing up every week, your labor cost formula is missing the number that explains why your profit keeps disappearing. Labor percentages tell you what labor costs. Overtime hours tell you whether your restaurant is actually under control. And restaurant pros, control is where profits live. There's one number that's quietly killing your restaurant profits, and most owners don't even know what it should be. It's your prime cost. And right now, most restaurants are running at least 15 points higher than they should be, which means you're working harder and making less than you deserve. If you're tired of being stuck in your restaurant, tired of inconsistent or non-existent profits, then it's time to find out what's really going on. I invite you to book a free 30-minute Restaurant Profit Finder call with my team, where you'll uncover exactly what's eating your profits and what it's costing you every single month. Just click the link in the description to get started.